If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. Thomas Jefferson, 1816. The word democracy has been echoed throughout our nation for too long without being challenged. Our founding fathers, by way of Vattel's 1758 Law of Nations treatise applied to principles of the law of nature, made it clear in the Declaration of Independence of 1776 that the earthly unalienable rights of the people rest on a sovereignty endowment from God, the sovereign of the universe, which comprehends man's duty and allegiance to God's law. The Ten Commandments, basis of the law of nature, that the people must institute government to secure their sovereign domestic rights, reserving the power to abolish any government that fails to do so. Following the declaration, each colony formed its own independent state government, most choosing to form a republic, others a commonwealth. 11 years later, in 1787, the framers of the Constitution made it clear in Article 4, Section 4 that states had established and were guaranteed a republican form of government. The Constitution or its amendments is wholly vacant of the word democracy. A democracy is a form of government where the people choose their own government, vested with the power to make law and the voice of the majority rules. Once the majority is established, the minority has no say. The key difference between a democracy, representative or otherwise, and a republic lies in the limits placed on government power to create law, which has implications for minority rights. Individual universal sovereignty is not protected. Most modern nations, including the United States of America, are democratic republics with a constitution, which can be amended by a popular elected government. However, only the United States government of, by, and for we the people recognizes the fundamental natural root law of sovereignty, and the possession of certain unalienable rights rest with the people endowed to them by God. These rights cannot be bartered away, or given away, or taken away except in punishment of a crime. Furthermore, the laws legislated by Congress and upheld by the judicial branch do not apply to the sovereign people outright, unless guilt is confessed. Rather, the application is determined ultimately by a jury of one's peers as an expression of absolute sovereignty over the government prosecution of the representative or president's created law. No law, criminal or civil, is broken when no actual injury can be shown. Accordingly, prior to any court instruction, the merits of the law, if challenged, must be argued before the jury. But today's trial rules prohibit such challenge by ways of fines, incarceration, or both. If the people are truly sovereign over their government, the only check and balance they hold over the judicial branch and ultimately the government itself is by way of the sovereign jury process. Those who replace the word republic synonymously with democracy are either woefully ignorant or they are part of the treacherous half-truth scheme to deceive and weaken a nation from within. As you continue to watch this presentation, you will see this theme. There are administrative forces aggressively working to mislead the masses toward this end. America's organic founding documents are centered on God's natural law gift of sovereignty to all mankind, and man's obligation and necessity to keep God's moral law to preserve it. This is why society needs to learn about the founders' designed intent and limitation on our federal republican form of government. In 1776, a new nation saw a glimpse of hope by recognizing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are the sovereign God-given gifts to all mankind. At the dawn of this new national concept, great thinkers began to pen these thoughts, and those thoughts were later written into what has become the world's longest surviving written charter of government, the Constitution for the United States of America. For 2.5 centuries, this document has laid the groundwork for a powerful and united nation. That nation now finds itself at a crossroads. Chaos born of an underlying deception has weaved its way in the fabric of our national discourse, robbing Americans of the knowledge of a sacrosanct right, either by simple unawareness or deliberate subversion. Has America seen its best days? Are there better days to come? Days of true unity, equity, and progress towards universally beneficial goals. Will we rip this deceptive festering from our culture and restore the precepts of the Founding Fathers? Will we sit idle and watch freedom and governance crumble? In the next 55 minutes, we will explore the history of our republic. We will look to our nation's foundational documents and examine the reasons for those written articulations and rightful action between ourselves, our government, and our neighbors around the globe. Immer David Till, a Prussian-born son of a minister, pondered the unspoken motives of the world's leaders and theological philosophical arguments for a reevaluation of contemporary governance.
Vattel was very passionate about his studies in natural as well as political law, along with the obligation of men to observe them.
The author was a theologian. He had studied theology and political sciences and the humanities. He was quite interested in the interaction of the laws of nature and the laws of nations. In the book, he comments on the fact that even if someone is an atheist, they still must abide by the laws of nature. In my military service as an officer in the United States Air Force, I attended doctrine school in Montgomery, Alabama. The concepts of this book were discussed as they pertain to the laws of war. Thus, my knowledge follows a more pragmatic approach pertaining to the founding of our country.
Everyone was in turmoil. Everyone needed to know, how do we stop, our leaders who are the cause? You have an emperor in power. How do you stop it?
The Law of Nations book was the impetus that inspired our founding fathers to move forward with creating a new country. It was highly influential to the creation of our original government.
America was in its crucible years, forming their own government after a failure of the British colonies to set up government in America. It was a failure. We had fought under the leadership of George Washington. We had fought the French Indian War. Emir de Vattel, a Prussian government official, had been sick and tired of the concept of war throughout Europe, over 660 years of war. And they wanted peace among themselves and, of course, the nations of the future.
So it was in 1758 that Vattel published his work, The Law of Nations, a legal treatise on international law. And he aimed to modernize and clarify existing norms, providing a systematic framework for understanding the conduct and affairs of the nations. It became a very important work for all of the world. Benjamin Franklin participated in this Albany Congress, and he played a key role. He emphasized the need for unity and cooperation among the colonies.
The copy of the Law of Nations book that was held at the library in Philadelphia, where all these meetings were being held by our founding fathers when they were establishing our country, was so worn by all of its use by the delegates that it had to be rebound.
George Washington, during his very first presidency, went to the New York Library and asked for a copy of the Law of Nations to study it himself. So he wasn't alone. All the founders were fascinated with this concept of limited government, maximum personal freedom.
That this was a document that is going to help them craft what is now our fundamental documents for the United States. From the Law of Nations spurned the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. That and a few others, a Bill of Rights, federalization, etc.
The Supreme Court handed down a great decision that forced inalienable rights. Butchers Union Company versus Crescent City Company. They declared that these inherent rights have never been more happily expressed in the Declaration of Independence, that the new evangel of liberty to the people, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that is so plain that their truth is recognized upon the mere statement, that all men are endowed. not by edicts of emperors or decrees of parliament or acts of Congress, but by their creator with certain inalienable rights. That is, rights which cannot be bartered away or given away or taken away, except in punishment of crime. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these, not grant them, but secure them, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Among these inalienable rights, as proclaimed in that great document, is the right of men to pursue their happiness, by which is meant the right to pursue any lawful business or vocation in any manner, not inconsistent with equal rights of others, which may increase their prosperity or develop their faculties so as to give them their highest enjoyment.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. All nations are equal. Those are two of the main concepts that come from the law of nature and of nature's God, and are reflected in the law of nations. So absolutely, the law of nations had a lot to do with the founding of our country.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful because it brings God back into the picture. And when I was researching as to why he wrote the book, it was because he was actually studying theology, he was studying philosophy, and he was a Protestant minister's son. He was actually a subject of the king, which I think is very interesting.
The law of nations is about principles of the law of nature applied to the conduct and affairs of nations and sovereigns. So they're taking the principles of the law of nature and applying to nations' conduct between states and nations. Then when you go to the contents, it starts out with preliminaries, and it lists in sections the definitions of various terms. And so these principles under the preliminaries are what dictates how you interpret the conduct of nations between nations.
I love Jefferson's statement in the Declaration. He says, "These truths are self-evident, that all men are endowed by their Creator with these inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. To secure the rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just power from the consent of the governed." So there comes the dividing truth for the future. Why would the law of nations work? Because it's built upon the foundational truth that the power, the root of power, was in the people themselves, not the government itself. And so it began in Philadelphia, the city of love. That Jefferson and Franklin bore the trademark of the Declaration. And then the Constitution, which was given posthumously to James Madison. He was the 5th president. And they brought about this whole concept of restricted, limited government born on the people. And so when we read today this famous line, Article 1, Section 8, to punish piracies, felonies under the law of nations, we have a new constricture that talks about we the people, the foundational power of government. Not the president, not the courts, and then the Bill of Rights, which was following to make more specific, what are these personal freedoms that they talk about? Right to life, right to protection, right to the courts, right to jury trial, and on it went. And I love the 10th Amendment. If we've forgotten anything, you can't do that either. So the founders had a destiny, and that was to bring about individual liberty through a name that today most people wouldn't be familiar with, called the Law of Nations. But it's going to be brought forward, hopefully, with this production, so that we can introduce to the education stream of our day, how do we get back to the beginning truths so that we can live free and raise our families and run our businesses, etc., and not be harassed by international border wars, which are going on to this very day. The United States of America today is the oldest form of government in the world. A lot of people don't know that. China's got a communist government. Russia's got a communist government. But here's the United States, 245 years old, the oldest form of government in the world, because the founders had that foundational truth we call the law of nations.
Little did David Till know that his book would give way to the development of a tiny new nation that would become an undisputed global leader.
Myself coming in from England 24 years ago, coming to America to live, raise a family, build a business. The only place in the world that allows you to do this. And I did. I come here for a couple of reasons. One was you had a constitution. Not understanding the fundamentals of this, but you had a constitution that I felt protected me. I read the Constitution, I read the Declaration of Independence. I was unaware of where it come from with the law of nations. The law of nations, as I said earlier, is the fundamental document that spurned these two great documents that gives the power to we the people, which is us. Not to government, not to Congress, not to anyone else. It was given to us by God. It is a God-given right. So it took to me, what do? Do I stay in England and be controlled by the masses? Or do I make a move to America? It was a big jump, huge jump for me. But the fundamental reason I come here was because of the Constitution, which spurns into the Bill of Rights. What it gave us was protection. Protection of the people, not protection of the government. What they've done since I've been here seems to have got worse on a daily basis, where they're taking away our rights as people. So to me, moving to America wasn't a difficult decision because of the Constitution, because of the Declaration of Independence. England didn't have it.
Well, the law of nations is, in my opinion, the fundamental root law from which the Constitution is derived. It's protected by name in the Constitution, and violations and punishments of the violations under that are a power of Congress. So it gave a check and balance to the people through their representation to keep government in the confines of where they're supposed to be.
It's because we the people do have the power. Anyone elected to a governmental position works for us. One of the things that have been missed, again, goes back to hidden history, goes back to cloaking, is the fact we have all the rights as people.
Article 4 was the state power, so that we the people could have a form of government to protect our power and our desires for our futures. So the law of nations became the text for American government.
The Constitution, which was established to secure those rights and that sovereignty domestically, and the Bill of Rights, which were additional items attached to the Constitution to make sure and to declare anything that might not be directly enumerated in the Constitution that further protected our individual liberties.
Another Supreme Court decision in 1886 recognized sovereignty in Yekwo versus Hopkins. Supreme Court stated in their findings that sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law. For as the author and source of law, but in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people by whom for all government exists and acts. And the law is the definition and limitation of power. It is indeed quite true that there must always be lodged somewhere the people, in some person, the juror or body, the jury, the authority of final decision, and, but in many cases, of mere administration, the responsibility is purely political. No appeal lying except to the ultimate tribunal of the public judgment, exercised either in the pressure of opinion or by means of suffrage. But the fundamental rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, considered as individual possessions, as in sovereignty, are secured by those maxims of constitutional law.
If you look back historically at the time that We the People was written and the Constitution and the states were ratified and all of the things that happened that formed this country as it is, most of the people at that point in time were very knowledgeable in the laws and their expressions around them because they protected the conditions of their expression of freedom and their pursuit of happiness without government intervention.
I'm going to read for you from Emer de Vattel's Law of Nations, what he describes as what is meant by a nation or a state. Nations or states are bodies politic, societies of men united together for the purpose of promoting their mutual safety and advantage by the joint efforts of their combined strength. So essentially, this is how we are made up of a body politic.
The Founding Fathers realized that the most effective form of government for their fledgling nation would be that a republic comprised of the representative entities of self-sovereign states would run by sovereign individuals, and that ultimately would control their own destinies for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
It was Franklin, when they left Independence Hall, who said to an inquiring citizen of the town, "What kind of a government have you given us?" Short answer: a republic if you can keep it.
Thus, the United States became a proverbial city on a hill, a bright light for people seeking freedom and opportunity, and a model government for nations to emulate and adopt. Today, however, we stand at a crossroad that demands we take another look. Look at the Law of Nations, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights, and ask ourselves, has there been a deep erosion of the original intent? We were meant to be a republic, not a democracy. Yet, today's politicos increasingly scream, democracy, democracy, democracy.
So, what lies are they telling us? Oh my gosh. The biggest one, I think, is that the U.S. is a democracy. Our founding fathers absolutely abhorred, hated democracies. Why? Well, because democracies throughout history have always failed, catastrophically. Mob rule will always degenerate into the mob. What's worse is that the corrupt politicians of today are calling what they are doing democracy, when in fact it's 100% socialism, fascism, communism, all rolled into one. Our founding fathers gave us a constitutional republic, one that has been hijacked for decades. America will never be a democracy. So when corrupt politicians say, quote, "We have to save our democracy," what are they actually saying? Because we're not a democracy, and the democratic principles that they are supposedly championing are actually socialism, fascism, and communism.
Republic, from the Latin, res publica, the public thing. How different from a democracy. James Madison said, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, and have been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their death. God forbid."
I feel that over the past, we've lost the interpretive value of its application, and Congress, for the most part, does not even know their power under the Law of Nations. Our country was established in its beginning through the Constitution and through the Treaty of Constitution to be a republic. It is democratically elected, but it is not a democracy. Democracy, by definition, is mob rule, We are not mob rule. We have a legislation, we have a judicial, we have an executive, and those things are supposed to be predicated to protect overrun or overreach of the expression of each of them's authorities granted by that is our representation. It is a power of the people. We the people are the sovereign, not the government. In many countries, it's the opposite. The government is always the sovereign and the people are subservient.
He is, in a homogeneous culture, it works great. It's everybody thinks alike, everybody's got the same backgrounds in this, and it's majority rules. It's one vote system, okay? But when you're in a melting pot of circumstances, democracy does not work. And what our founding fathers created was a democratic republic.
So that's not our form of government. We have a republic, okay? We established the legislature in the first place. We gave them the power to do certain things, but we did not give them the power to change the fundamental laws. And part of those fundamental laws are between nations and between governments and citizens of nations.
The people created a republican form of government with limitations on their servants. The people are the government, not their servants. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. Nietzsche, German, says, democracy can be explained as two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for dinner, or a political system calculated to make an intelligent minority subject to the will of the stupid. So, and mob rule would be democracy. Majority rules.
One of the biggest lies that's being told is that we are a democracy. And America was not created as a democracy. Our founding fathers created America as a republic, and a very unique, special republic at that, one that had never been done before. One that was based on the laws of nature and of nature's God, based on God's law, based on moral law. The Russian Communist Party and leader of the Bolshevik Revolution said that the goal of socialism is communism. Communism is not a good thing. And that's where we've been headed. It's a big lie.
They want to push on us the fact that we're a democracy. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. Hidden history again. The biggest problem that I see is people are still asleep. They are completely oblivious and unaware of what is happening around them. They do not see that we are losing our republic. All they see is, do I get up for work? Do I go to work? Do I have enough money to pay my mortgage, pay my car, have a meal out, then rinse and repeat the next day? That's what they're seeing. They're not seeing what is actually happening out there. A democracy, it will take away all our rights. What this will do is give government bigger overreach, which at the moment the overreach is immense. We have 50 sovereign states that are governed by the state legislators. That I'm not sure whether those state legislators on their own are selling us out. And I don't want to make this political at all. I want to make this educational. But it seems to me that they could be, because the federal side of the government has tremendous overreach at this moment in time. The founding fathers put this together that it is governed by state and state foremost, not federal. Federal has its place, but it should be a small part of our country. But they've made it a big part of our country, which I still believe is wrong, because mostly states are different, so states need to be governed by their own jurisdiction and not by the federal jurisdiction.
We're all involved in this project of Law of Nations. is to bring everybody's awareness of what sovereignty is and how it affects you in your daily lives, and how it has been lost in our daily educations, our schools, and it's just people have no clue as far as really what is controlling their lives, and not understanding that they have the control of their own life by being sovereign and exercising their sovereignty over their circumstance and their choices. And then if you understand the source of sovereignty being God and the 10 Commandments, the law of God that he attached to the gift endowment he gave us, that God, it's not so much religious, the 10 Commandments, but it was God's way of giving us a plan for how to live our lives.
The media and education have formed a joint agenda to deprive us of an understanding that we truly are uniquely sovereign states. When do we collectively forget that our nation was expressly and with reason designed as a republic? And why does that matter? A democracy is a mob rule. Mob rule mandates that if 51% of a group want to make a particular decision, the other 49% are stuck with it. So, if the United States were truly a democracy, and without a representative republic, California, New York, and a handful of other high-populated states could dictate the entire voting process. But what we have is a representative republic. Or do we? Let's look back at 1871, when, seemingly out of nowhere, America's corporate democracy was created.
1871, with the Organic Act of 1871, the corporation was formally created for the 10-mile square area called Washington, D.C. That pretty much put the nail in the coffin of the republic.
And Great Britain, of all the kingdoms of this world, took it to heart that it isn't for the people to have power, they're to be servants. And therefore, they came back a second time after we'd beaten them in the War of 1812. And when they lost that war, it became subversion. They realized they could never attack Americans on their soil. So I think that's where we are today, is we're seeing the subversive nature.
The people have never been told that their republic was pushed aside and that powers that be went forward with a corporate democracy. That the definition of the United States, according to the corporate democracy, is listed in the United States Code, Title 28, Section 300215A, is a federal corporation. It's privately owned. It's a corporation. And the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, acknowledged in the case of Downs versus Bidwell in 1901 that there are two parallel governments that run on this land at the same time.
It's more like the erosion of the beach sands that we've seen our rights constitutionally and under the expression of our so-called balance of powers erode. Over the years, the bench or the court systems, in my opinion, have morphed or changed the expression of application to the people. And for the most part, the apathy of the people in their quest to express their rights has left them with a void of the lack of understanding.
Well, right now, the sovereign power of states isn't really what it should be. It should be that, okay, so the state had to tax for the purposes of the federal government. The government passes a bill. They said, we want to do this as a federal government. They hand the bill to the state by apportionment and enumeration. Bill comes back. The state says, how are you going to raise the money? Well, now we just let one group of people raise all the money for everything. And I think the states are have lost their power, but their power was supposed to be more like we decide what happens.
I believe the entire Constitution and the Declaration of Independence have been completely hidden from the masses. It is no longer taught in the schools, and it's actually regarded by many students now, because of how they're taught in the schools, as being something out of date, musty, needing updating, needing renovation, which is, of course, completely contrary to what it was established to be.
From the beginning of the founding era, with our first president, George Washington, who served as president under the Constitution for the United States of America for 2 terms, he wrote a farewell address before he left office that counseled the American people on how to maintain the sacred fires of liberty and warned them about what to watch out for with cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men, taking the 3 branches of government and making them into 1 branch of government like what we see today. And the school children were required through all of those years to memorize that farewell address, because they were told that it was the most important presidential address that was ever done. And then just before the turn of the century, the farewell addresses were put into all textbooks, all school textbooks, and they were still memorized up until the Second World War, and then that was taken out. For shame.
How can our children bring forth that history and that knowledge? So to me, our system, which is a school system, is the biggest bearer of not education. And when I say not education, if you see what they teach at schools, it is not education. So with the hidden history is what I like to call it, because that has our history written in it. And if it's not taught or passed down from our peers, no one can then know our history. To me, hidden history is everything. And I like to call it cloaking, because they've put a cloak up, they've put a wall in front of us so we can't, as people, which is truly understand what is our God-given rights.
The next phase of this great lie in hidden history is a convergence of corporations and government and the use of collaborative power to eat away at people's rights. If the government can't do it, they will work in secret to allow corporations to hinder your ability to buy goods, have a job, and provide for your family. This is an unholy alliance that will only serve to further reduce our rights, erode first at the state level, and ultimately as individuals.
Lincoln knew that he was fighting more than the Confederates. He was up against the international bankers who were trying to take over our country. They wanted a private bank in our country. Our founding fathers, they did it twice, and they knew that it would extract the wealth out of the people, and the bankers would get control of the volume and the value of money and also the credit and extract the wealth of the people. It would ruin the nation. And so the founding fathers did not want a private banking institution, and they framed in the Constitution that Congress should have control of the money and the coining of money. But the international bankers compromised members of Congress, and he said he couldn't fight both the Confederates and the bankers at the same time. He would have to put his focus on one of them. He said the Confederates were more honorable than the bankers. And he said that he would deal with it after the war was over.
Money. Everything is banking. We were purposefully kept from the banking industry. We didn't learn anything about banking in school. I taught math, and I had to try to incorporate the banking as much as I could in there because it was not part of the curriculum, purposefully. But the court systems are bank. The biggest bank in the world is the post office.
the people who benefit from your ignorance are the people that we need to watch out for, because they can benefit from your ignorance. One of the ways that they would benefit would be to make money off of whatever it is they're telling you have to do. You know, most of it's money. You know, it's just about making money off you.
But in 1933, when FDR, when he basically handed us over, they took away our ability to pay anything with silver or gold, with lawful money instead of legal money.
This immoral group of people have taken over the nations of the world and put their corporate democracies in each nation along with their banking institution so that they would have control of money and the people's resources and their governments.
Now, the United States court systems are still among the best in the world, and we should not deny that. We must protect that system as a juror, in a grand jury, or on a jury. We must pass judgment not only on the person accused, but also on the relevant law. This is a critically important vote that goes beyond the ballot box and directly affects the lives of defendants, their families, and those who may find themselves accused of the same crimes in the future.
We, our founding fathers, developed a 3-vote system. The first vote is your political vote, and that's your vote that you exercise on election day. The only problem is, what if there's no integrity in the election system? That vote is gone. The second vote was under the Bill of Rights, that everybody had certain rights. One of them was that a prosecutor could not charge you with a crime unless he first went before a grand jury and got a 50% vote from the jury panel to go ahead and charge you. That was your second vote. The third vote is your actual trial vote as a juror. And that is the most powerful vote that you have if you are on a jury panel. Because, number one, no one has ever been arrested or gone to jail because how they voted. Number two, you are the sovereign. You are back in control of the law that's before you to judge. Now, the judge might tell you, you don't have right to judge the law. But no, as a sovereign, you must judge the law to make sure that they're not abusing its application in such a way that it's infringing on your inalienable rights or the person's rights who's being charged. And so that jury right to judge the law and to, as well as the facts that determine the evidence of guilt or not, that is key to sovereignty. It brings you back to who's in control of the whole system. It's we the people. And if they pass bad law and try to prosecute bad law, we have the right through the jury system and through the Bill of Rights, not only in criminal cases, but in civil cases. Everybody has the right to a trial by jury. And the Founding Fathers, and that's what they were talking about, the misconstruction or the misapplication of law in the preamble. That is why jury rights were just hammered through in the Bill of Rights. And that is a republic. That is sovereignty being, and sovereigns protecting sovereignty.
Trouble is, when a judge instructs members of a jury to decide based on a particular set of standards, those standards may well be unjust themselves. The judge has now stacked the deck in favor of a particular agenda. There's a growing problem in America that threatens the legal rights of every citizen. It is the overreach of the judicial system that also is being exploited by the executive branch. To understand more, get a copy of the Citizens Rulebook and learn what the Founding Fathers created to protect us from judicial overreach.
The expression of these things in government has been to the concept of the benefit of government and enforcement to these things under the guise of the betterment of society. We gave up certain expressions of freedom, and in doing so, we gave an inch, they took a mile. It's been 80 years, 90 years for them to do so, but the evaporation of our constitutional given expressions are something that most people feel have been taken by the Patriot Act and things of this nature, where in fact that modification to the Constitution would require legislation and ratification, and none of that's been done. So technically speaking, this has all been done from the position of the bench or from the court and its interpretive values, and have usurped those abilities. Those abilities were granted by Congress in the initiation of war because of national emergency. But for the most part, those expressions are something that should have been negated once the emergency was over, and instead they used it to glorify their condition and continue the usurpation through the process of, as I said, like an erosion. The concept has grown to the point that we as people are more in court for violations of rules as opposed to violations of laws. This has usurped the whole concept of the balance of innocent until proven guilty.
Look deeply into what the powers that be intend for our nation, as opposed to what the forefathers meant. In the early 20th century, a long-contested proposal fundamentally changed the way the Senate worked and the role of America's senators. Originally appointed, senators were tasked with safeguarding their state's sovereignty. Their primary purpose was to ensure laws didn't infringe on state rights. The first proposal to amend the Constitution to elect senators by popular vote was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1826, but would be nearly a century before the idea gained traction with the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913. Elections for senators began.
When our country was set up with the bicameral Congress and Assembly, where you had a Congress divided in two houses. One was the House of Representatives. That's the people's house. Then you have the Senate, and that was the state's house. And those senators, for the beginning, and it was designed that they would be appointed. And those senators would look after the state's interest in regard to any proposed government legislation. And then our representatives directly reported to the interests of we the people. They made an amendment to the Constitution that basically took the state's participation in the government process away by converting the senator's position to an elected one. And they were elected just like your representative. And all of a sudden the states are dealt out of the process of the bicameral operation and forming of legislation and laws, and their interests are kicked to the curb. And I think that's the start of it. And then the political machines got involved and started redefining how this government's worked, and that see, you elect these people, that the majority vote wins and they win.
The shift, however, resulted in senators being reliant on and far more interested in pleasing their electorates than protecting state rights. And the lack of term limits, warned against by founding fathers including Jefferson and Franklin but were never addressed, has now allowed senators unlimited 6-year stints. Some have served up to half a century and made millions of dollars. The legislator does not seem interested in creating law. When a legislator is elected to write and help pass laws that benefit and protect the constituency, they are protecting our republic. Instead, the legislative branch seems to be content with executive orders and allowed judicial branch rulings to become the law of the land. This affords legislators a convenient opportunity to hide behind process walls and claim that certain decisions are laws or out of their control. The reality is, these laws should be driven by legislators who are elected to help protect us from the very brand of governmental overreach. This is their responsibility. If it is kicked back by the courts, is to go into Congress and create law, not hide.
We established the legislature in the first place. We gave them the power to do certain things, but we did not give them the power to change the fundamental laws. And part of those fundamental laws are between nations and between governments and citizens of nations. So what happened in like 1934 is Supreme Court gave the power to make the rules to the Supreme Court, to make the rules for the courts. They actually commanded them to do it. So once and it took like 6 or 7 years to do it. And when they submitted the rules for approval of Congress, then from then on, the judicial branch was making its own rules. And that's a little fishy.
In truth, we've come to realize that many of our once trusted legislators are willing puppets to certain bureaucrats and judicial appointees. In the film The Patriot, actor Mel Gibson's character initially opposed going to war with Great Britain. He asked pointedly, "Why should I trade one tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away?" Today, one could argue that we continue to battle thousands of new tyrants in the form of government bureaucrats and other leaders who daily overstep our state and individual rights, sacrificing our sovereignty to a federal government largely uninterested in our day-to-day lives. It is no secret that bureaucratic organizations run by individuals who were never elected to office regularly create codes and laws that are passed not from House or Senate floor, but from a judge's bench or bureaucratic office. It's also no secret that many of these codes and laws fail to align with our Constitution or our status as a republic. Article 1, Section 6 declares that no elected officials will serve in any other capacity while they serve in the legislature. This is important to note and reveals a current danger in our system. Lawyers. We elect lawyers to Congress and they write laws that benefit lawyers. This is a very dangerous trend. First, because they create nuance within the law that gives them and their ilk tools to self-advance. Second, they are in violation of Article 1, Section 6 because they serve as officers of the court while simultaneously serving in the legislature. To put in simple terms, the current system is hiring the fox to build and guard the henhouse. The dangers of holding more than one office is the subsequent violation of oath to support the Constitution under Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2, and Article 6, Clause 3. For example, he or she that receives a law degree from an accredited school is a lawyer. In order to practice law or bring an action in any federal court, that lawyer is required to join the participating bar association. Therefore, they are an attorney at law and voluntarily consents to being an officer of the court in that jurisdiction, subject to any presiding judge's sanctions for certain conduct that could amount to fines and incarceration. Additionally, a significant number of legislators, both state and federal, are attorneys at law, officers of the court, subject to an oath or affirmation to support the U.S. Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land that every state judge or court officer is bound thereby, found in Article 6, Clauses 2 and 3. This circumstance on its face places every legislative vote by an officer of the court at risk for being invalid by conflict of interest, therefore making those votes null and void. Every enacted adopted law could be subject to a recount to verify passage.
Now today, I don't know that any of them represent anything other than their own self-interest for the most part. It appears that there's an agenda that is yet unspoken, and that agenda is to destroy the country as it was by appearance. This is what it appears. The national security or the border is primarily the first, in my opinion, responsibility of the executive branch. And this is something that when they waylaid this and opened the borders, they allowed technically an invasion of our country without check and balance. These people aren't even vetted that are coming in. So, and on top of that, the benefits given to them through their motion into our country is thrown back to us as a burden of taxes, and the people, we the people, suffer for the lack of the funding that would have been to domestic use and to the position that we no longer have representation. The people that are coming into the country are receiving more of that benefit than we are.
Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends. It is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. Remember those words, because those words are what are given to us. They are the words that the government does not want us to hear. Why? Because those words on their own give us the right to run these people out of town because of what they're doing. This is what we want to get across to people, that there is written declarations in our favour. And we need to educate people. And we need to remove these people.
Questioning authority is not rebellion. We need to question everything. Question is going to give us clarity. Questioning is going to lead us to our freedoms. Humbly, we need to take our country back. This is not by force. We're not doing this belligerent. We are not trying to create anything. We're going to follow the steps that, if we follow what the Bible says, our trust indenture, it gives us everything that we need to do things the right way.
This is not what I anticipated coming here 24 years ago. And when do you say enough's enough? That is not in my vocabulary, not in my personality, to do any of them. I will never give up. When we have these fundamental legislative decrees in our favour, and I go back to the hidden history and the cloaking, when I still feel that they are worth fighting for, which they are, I'm going to fight. The way that I fight is not to go out in the street and start punching people, not at all. It's about education. This is all put here so that we can educate the people that are asleep of what is for us. I will never give up. I am now a citizen of America. I am proud to be a citizen of America. I love America. I love America probably more than most Americans because they haven't experienced what I've experienced in my life. We are the shining light for the world. And if we don't do something to bring that to bear, bring it to the people, to educate people who we are, what rights we have, it could be lost forever. And we don't want that to happen. That is why I am so passionate about explaining the history which is hidden. It's ironic in a way that an Englishman has to come here to explain to you Americans what has not happened and what should happen and what are your rights.
The American Republic that our founding fathers created was a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's the people's government. And so naturally, the people must participate in their government, and they must know what the government is and how it is to operate so that it functions correctly. The people are the ones that have the responsibility to maintain the sacred fires of liberty.
The liberties that we originally started in this country created a great deal of abundance. Now, that abundance has become complacency and apathy, and now people have grown dependent. And that is bondage. You are slaves to government and everything they do because you don't compel yourself to go out and get self-esteem, work for a living, provide for your children, provide for yourself first. You must have self-respect before you can give respect. And these are common sense things, but so many people are lost in all of the different choices they got. You just got to keep it simple.
People are the sovereign, not the government. In many countries, it's the opposite. The government is always the sovereign and the people are subservient. Here, it is the difference. And we have slowly been, like the frog in the water, boiled to the point of death or near death of our execution of civil rights and constitutional rights. And most people don't practice the education of law. They're too busy in life, and we rely upon our representation to do this. It is important that we as citizens, as Americans, come back to a position that we do understand and find the expression of our rights.
And get back to basic principles of morals, ethics, civility, respecting each other, living men and women on the land working together to make society a better place.
The law of nations itself isn't going to help. It's only going to help you understand what right you do have. You know, who you really are. You really are somebody. And you really do have the power to change things.
Be active in government. Don't be passive. And the passiveness is the apathy that has choked and strangles all of our freedoms. So it's something we must be active if we care. Quit being Republican or Democrat, be American and stand in the American light.
It's time for Americans to stand up, not just at the polls, on the issues of the day, telling their elected representatives, the highest form of power, the elected representative, and tell them where you stand, because it affects the family. What affects the family affects the nation.
Our founding fathers were optimists, some would say fanatically so. For the sake of our great country, for our great republic, for us, our founding fathers put their lives on the line. Many were imprisoned, had their wealth taken from them, or were killed because of their radical work, yet they persisted. We are a beautiful country comprised of a melting pot of people. We cannot risk becoming a socialist or communist nation of people forced to believe or pretend to believe in the same ideal. That would tarnish the beauty of what this nation is. A city on a hill where people from home and around the globe have the freedom to find God, to love their neighbor, to create business, and to work with people they want to work with, to generate prosperity that affords generational wealth for their descendants to contribute to a greater good, and help clear the way for the pursuit of happiness for everyone. God bless the United States, and God bless our republic.